Hola, buenas noches. Vamos a empezar con la actividad de hoy. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas por venir a una nueva actividad pública del CEAC. Hoy tenemos el placer de recibir a la oficina suiza Comte Meuwly. Nos visita Adrien Comte de Meuwly. Estamos muy agradecidos que ambos hayan aceptado esta invitación de venir a presentar su trabajo al CEAC. Para nosotros es un privilegio poder compartir este espacio no solo con prácticas consagradas internacionales, como todos los personajes que nos visitaron estos últimos 2 años, sino abrir un poco la mesa y este espacio a prácticas emergentes que funcionan un poco como referencia para el perfil de graduados que nos podemos imaginar en esta escuela y también para traer al presente discusiones alrededor del mundo de prácticas más jóvenes, de prácticas que están dando sus primeros pasos en consagrarse, con la discusión de los temas de su trabajo. Como siempre, ahora voy a dejar en los ingresos al auditorio el calendario de actividades públicas del CEAC. Todas estas actividades son de acceso libre, con inscripción, se anotan como siempre a través de la página web de la escuela. Las próximas 2 actividades que vamos a tener este mes son, por un lado, una mesa redonda sobre la restauración de la casa sobre el arroyo de Amorcio Williams y de Fernández. Esta mesa redonda va a estar presidida por Fabio Bermentieri, que es el director del programa de paisaje, que participó de este proyecto junto a Mariana Quiroga, Patrimonio, WP. Fabio dirige el programa de patrimonio de la escuela y junto a Mariana Quiroga llevó adelante el programa de la restauración de la casa sobre el arroyo. Esta mesa redonda va a contar con la presencia de Magali Marazo y de Guillermo Frontera. Recientemente la restauración recibió el premio NOL Intervenciones en el Patrimonio, así que creo que va a ser un muy lindo encuentro para conocer todos los pormenores de la recuperación de esta obra. La siguiente actividad que vamos a tener este mes es la visita de ETH Zúrich, que va a estar presentando su libro Radical Pedagogies en el marco de un programa que está llevando adelante la maestría en Historia y Crítica de la Arquitectura en torno a la Escuelita, Buenos Aires, 1976 y 1982. Esta actividad, acá está mal, lo tenemos que corregir, va a ser a las 18 horas, no va a ser a las 19. Después ahora lo ponemos bien en la web. Va a ser una actividad un poco más extensa porque Beatriz va a presentar su libro y después vamos a tener una conversación abierta con Pancho, Luis Lucía y Sandro Morini sobre pedagogías radicales en torno a la escuelita. Bueno, ahora, sin más preámbulos, me gustaría invitar a Facundo Fernández, profesor de la Escuela y director de Estudios, a hacer un breve comentario sobre el trabajo de Adrien. Y bueno, agradecerles nuevamente a todos por venir esta noche. Gracias.
Well, we're going to switch to English in order then to understand clearly. Adrien, he's Adrien Conte, Adrien Meuwly. They are coming from Switzerland, so welcome here again. We are very proud, me and like all the people from the university, for the faculty that you're here, so it's a pleasure. Adrien Comte and Adrien Meuwly, they started their studies at the EPFL Lausana. They finished their bachelor there, and they hold their master degrees in architecture from the ETH Zúrich. They actively participate in various research and teaching projects at the ETH, Adrien Comte, and at the École nationale d'architecture de Versailles, Adrien Meuwly. They started their professional practice shortly before completing their diploma at the university. Immediately after, in 2017, they established their own office in Zurich. Comte Meuwly places particular emphasis on the importance of asking the right questions and understanding the underlying issues to ensure successful project outcomes. They highlight the complexity of architecture, which involves not only addressing functional requirements, but also considering broader contextual factors such as climate needs and social economic environments. Since its inception, their practice has been rooted on learning through experimentation, leading to unexpected encounters and unpredictable discoveries. As they express, they cultivated their capacity to be surprised and fascinated by these observations and experiences. Projects are developed as narratives without necessarily knowing how or where it ends. It's all about making the most of what is there, understanding the logic of things, their possibilities, and interpreting new potential applications. Their office in Zurich functions both as workspace as an experimentation workshop. The breadth of their architecture can be understood from their involvement in all stages of the processes, actively interacting from the conception of projects to their executions, leading to reinventing techniques, rethinking their own theory, and executing new narratives. Comte Meuwly boasts a diverse team of professionals, including architects, urban planners, landscape architects, and builders, who collaborate on projects of varying scales across Europe. From Ditella, we welcome you and we invite you to commence your presentation, and thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Facundo, for the introduction, and thank you all for the invitation. We are spending such a good time in Buenos Aires discovering this incredible city, and also in the very best company. So thank you so much to all of them, all of those that have been guiding us into this fantastic city in the last days. So as you said, I'm Adrien, this is Meuwly, and we have our atelier between Zurich but also in Geneva. I mean, mainly a bit in between, in Switzerland, and we have the chance to work with such a great team, so I think that most of what you will see tonight is also thanks to them. We tried to structure a bit the presentation of the evening into 4 chapters, trying to frame our attitude, let's say, towards building, and for each chapter a selection of projects coming from our practice. As architects, we are constantly confronted with very diverse environments. Dealing with the general complexity of the built fabric, we promote an attitude that seeks to constantly reconsider the questions and tasks that we are given in order to sharpen problematics. Our aim is to always act according to the right criteria, and this means that we are developing project strategies before providing solutions. Our project then becomes long processes of refining questions from the first sketch to the building site in order to always be more precise about the issues we are dealing with rather than imposing solutions. And this is why we want to be very close to what we produce. Until now, we have always been following and managing our construction sites of all of projects because we think that we need this proximity with our work. And this also allows us, or this process also allows us to break down the constructive decision, starting a construction site and still being able to react on what is being done. Yeah? Better? Okay.
Yeah, you need to speak to like
yeah.
the left
to
side.
The left side of the audience. No, thanks. No, so I was saying that we always really follow closely our construction site because it allows us to break down the decisions and the process and to still being able to react while the construction site is being done. But to be really honest, it's also that we love to spend a lot of time on the construction site. So we try to always be looking for specific answers by learning to react to the situations we encounter, the structures and building we find, and to see and enhance the opportunities of the situations we are dealing with. Every time we are re-questioning the constructive elements, the choice of the material, and the way to assemble them. And we are, of course, always looking for a certain efficiency, always trying to achieve more with less. So let's say that we have this fascination of finding the way to put things together according to the specific situation that we are dealing with. And therefore, we are always developing specific details and precise construction logics, as we believe that you cannot really answer a specific question with a general solution or a standard detail. We don't really believe in the construction detail found in the encyclopedia, copied and repeated in all types of random places without any consideration of the context, repeating the same trick over and over again. We are rather convinced that there are no preconceived solutions, and that we need to seriously react to the situations we are working on and to enhance them precisely. We have to constantly question the norms, conventions, and standards. In other words, we need to question what we take for granted and force ourselves to change the way we look at things. So all the previous images we've seen on the screen are from the project Maximum House that we have recently completed. And in this case, the biggest challenge was to enter a rather absurd regulation, which was forcing us to build a minimum of 250 square meters on the plot, when only 150 square meters were necessary to the client and feasible within the budget. So we had to turn this somehow constraint into an opportunity. Let's say 1/3 of the house had to be built almost for free. So this allowed us to maximize the usages and the possibilities by opening the house to a semi-tempered space, a protected area flirting with the boundaries of the isolated limits of the house, almost like living within the facade thickness. A space that can be used all year round, or a covered terrace that can be completely open, a place for parties, sport, game, and workshops. By regulation and by official building permits, it is a parking. But in reality, cars don't really bother to stay outside, leaving to the inhabitants the freedom to appropriate the space in many ways. On the upper space, each room benefits from the maximum generosity as possible. By literally pushing back its limits, the space always opens towards the next one, flowing further out. For example, here, we can see in the middle, both children's rooms that can be completely combined in one big one, thereby neutralizing the lost space of the corridor, which disappears from the plan. We also cherish very much the quality of the bathroom in direct relation to the winter garden, being able to take a shower almost outside by fully opening the window. You see a bit more this children playground combined with the bathroom, where basically being used as one space, but also being able to close both big sliding doors and sleep at night. The additional surface area is basically obtained by distancing the final layer of the facade from the rest of the composition of this main facade. It's a tension membrane that ensures that the house is watertight and that we had to build anyways. We just took the opportunity to push it away to distantiate it from the facade or from the isolation of the house, therefore creating a space in between. The membrane performs differently depending on the needs of the space. It protects more opaque, or it reacts in a more opaque way towards the neighbors, opalescent to capture diffuse light but block views. Facing the view, it acts as a transparent membrane, being able to completely slide up and open in a basically terrace space. So the goal of the project is really to maximize the possibilities for using a house by blurring its boundaries. The physical boundary, the visual boundary, and the energetic boundary are broken down into several layers, allowing different configurations for different times and uses. This allows us to totally change the configuration of spaces, depending on the season, the time of the day, the needs of the inhabitants, or the weather conditions. It redefines rooms as undefined spaces, sometimes small and intimate, sometimes much larger and more open. So this project, the Maximum House, that we have just seen, is actually part of a series of 6 projects, or a family of 6 projects that we had the chance to develop in the last 5 years. And we can call them case study or prototype projects. Each of them, or the goal of each of them, is really to deal with a very specific condition and trying to avoid any generic answer by developing constructions and as experiments for very precise situations. In other words, we try to define constructive logic that echoes to the specificities of the context in a very broad meaning. The filter house is the second project of this case study series, answering to an ambiguous and fluctuating context. In that case, a beautiful garden, but with the train tracks passing right on the edge of the plot, right in front of the industrial zone of the city, between the big boxes and the oil tanks. And we have to admit that this is a type of contrast that really stimulates us. It is a project that makes the climatic fluctuation of the environment an opportunity for space to evolve and react, rather than trying to resist and isolate ourselves against it, reacting to fluctuations of the close surroundings and of the climate and environment in general. What we can see in the ground floor plan here is the relationship with an existing garage structure, which is the square on the bottom left, that was already there and that we decided to keep, and we could use all the technical could be used to insert all the technical equipments of the house in order to free completely the ground floor plan of the main building. Therefore, we also didn't have to build any garage or basement, taking advantage of what was already there. One of the other main constraints of the building was to be extremely compact in order to leave enough space as possible for the garden. The structure is a prefabricated structure which is completely pushed towards the outside of the plan, and which allows it to be freely and entirely open and fluid. The goal is that these plans should be super easily modifiable, adaptable according to the needs. And we have to confess that at the stage of the construction picture that we see here on the screen, we still didn't know where we were going to organize the partition walls. And it's something that for us is very important, that we need to be able to react and adapt during the construction site. The last floor plan, totally open, and we see the prefab construction in the atelier. We could draw, as it's very systematized building technique, we could go to drawing until every screw with a very simple and rational but refined construction. Let's say maybe the most impactful device of the project came by rethinking the constructive elements. And in this case, the facade that we decomposed into a series of layers of filters, like exterior vegetation, exterior curtain, glass, ventilation gap, interior curtain. The goal was really to understand every parameter of the facade in order to decompose it into these different layers. That allows to negotiate the climatic condition of its two sides. Here we see this big outside curtain that can be completely folded in front of the house, either to protect from the views or to protect from the sun. The big open foldable windows and cables for plants to grow, but we still have to wait a bit. This beneficial relationship to the surrounding also requires some efforts from the inhabitants. It means to engage directly with the environment, to understand when to draw the curtain, how to cross-ventilate, and it really requires a certain effort. But it's also what is so beautiful. In other words, we really like to say that it's more a complex tent than a house, where the users can adapt each layer according to the conditions. From the other side, you can directly derive your basilicum from the garden. Oops. Here we start to slowly see the plants growing along the facade, which is mainly the biggest filter that we developed in the project. But we, as I said, we still have to wait a bit. We are going there every few months, and each time it's a bit bigger. With this picture, maybe already 1 year ago. As the plants were chosen to lose their leaves during winter, and in the summer they form a very dense protective layer against the sun, and in the winter all the leaves fall down, and then it allows to gain all the solar gains, and we almost don't need to heat the house at all during winter. So we also like to say that the project is done by the assemblage of things and objects. Let's say some projects in the projects. It's always a question of how to connect the structure, how to assemble, how to combine, and how to give different meanings to things. Until the very little detail, which we also produce ourselves. And we are very happy to see how the house evolves. Now, 2 years after the completion of the construction, we try to monitor also every climatic conditions and to try to see how to react. We are still waiting a bit for the plants to grow, but now I think they reached already the second floor, and it's pretty dense already. And it's very nice that each time we go, we have to say the space is completely differently inhabited, and in ways that we would never have imagined or been able to draw. Another project from this case studies is the permanent weekend house, and also it's our very first project. In this case, let's say there were a series of specific conditions, and one was the particularity of a very longitudinal plot with a very dense vegetation and very beautiful. The second one is the existing structure of a prefabricated chalet, a very small structure that we see on the top of the plan, a square building, 45 square meters, which we had to convince the clients to keep. As it was already there, why should we demolish it? And then maybe the last but not least condition was an extremely small budget and almost no time to realize the project. The main idea was to extend the main living room of the existing chalet, which we see on the top of the plan, 25 meters down, resulting into a plan of 4 meters wide by 25 meters long. And this narrowness, allowing to live constantly in direct relationship to the garden, we can say it produces a long shell in which some light furniture elements are placed to refine the series of uses in an unfilled spaces. Another thing is that all of these furnitures are never going to the top of the ceiling because the chalet, or this existing chalet, is 1.50 meters higher than the extension. And so from the chalet, you can see through the whole house. In order to be efficient, the construction consists of a highly simple section, a wooden frame repeated 10 times from the existing little chalet and throughout the whole plot. This is mainly the repetition that allowed us to save a lot of time and money. And the main volume, or the section, is basically defined from the shape of the original chalet that we simply extruded. At the end, it becomes a very rich assemblage of two different types of structures, both very simple, but once articulated together, they are producing something also that we couldn't have expected. Allowing to go through the house like walking through the garden and taking your bath within the trees. In the case of the House for Everything, we can say that the main context was a social one in that case. The project is located on the edge between a historical village center and a large field, an orchard with many fruit trees. By directing the large roof towards the village, it echoes the surrounding roof structures, on the other side, opening wide into the landscape of the fields. But as I said, the relationship with the village is above all a social one. It is at the same time a home for its residents and a gathering place for the village population. It aims to respond to the lack of community space in the village since the recent closure of the local restaurant, which was a big drama, which was basically the last common space of the village. By offering a very wide range of uses like workshops, exhibitions, space, dining rooms, yoga rooms, concert rooms, theater stage. This duality in the program between a house and its public equipment is achieved by the organization of the plan. On one side, a very generous space, freed from any constraint or any constraining elements. And on the other side, a series of rooms with very specific functions that you see here on the right side of the plan. Bedroom, bathroom, storage and kitchen. A performative setup that supports the generosity of the larger space. What was also important that both should be able to function separately or independently, being able to use the house by itself while a big event could happen in the main room. The flexibility of the space is therefore amplified by a device that allows it to react to the fluctuating and uncertain parameters of the environment. And it should also be able to adapt to the different needs of activities it should host. A long pivoting roof activated by hydraulic arms that allows the condition of the living space to be completely adjusted. From a very large open plan emphasizing the relationship with the surrounding landscape, capturing as much natural light as possible, to a much more protected space once the roof is tilted downwards. So here we see a bit more this pivoting axis on the four arms and the big facade that can completely open towards the fields. Extending the activities of the house to the terrace that runs all around and serves as a secondary circulation. From this side, we see the, let's say, public entrance of the building, and on the right, you could guess the more private entrance to the house. These are screenshots from a fantastic video by Ciro Miguel, where we see how the light condition and the space completely changes depending on the roof position, and also how the space reacts, or how it completely is able to manage the space inside. From the other side, the membrane facade acts as a protective net in front of the windows that can be folded back up when needed, filtering the views, the light, and allowing for a certain intimacy when needed for the house. And built in a very pragmatic and direct way, a tense membrane on two profiles, with some parts which can be open on hinges here, for instance. Okay.
My turn to have a microphone. It doesn't work. Yes, maybe. Let me try. Okay, let's go.
Let's try now.
Okay, now?
Yeah.
Now, yes.
Otherwise, we share this one.
Yes, I can just use the other one. It's a little break. Try again. Yes.
A ver ahora. Avísame que me punteo. No es que iba a acoplar. Si no usamos el audio, no.
Working again.
Ahí. Ahí está puteado. Ahí está puteado. ¿Ves?
Okay. Now it's
Está acoplando a pelota.
being too loud. No, it's fine. But it worked like this. Okay.
¿Escucha bien? Acopla. A ver.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, Javier asked us to do a long lecture, so that's our trick. So, yes. Should I can also use a normal microphone.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Should work now?
Now it should work.
Yeah.
Yes. No, not really.
Yeah. No, there.
Okay. Okay, now it's good. Perfect. Thank you. So,
We just want somebody to take out.
one to 10,000. I'm going to talk about how scale interacting in our projects from the macro scale of 1 to 10,000 to the micro scale of 1 to 1. So the scale of the territory influencing the details and vice versa. Thank you. So we are working with many diverse scales and through the scales in the aim that architecture responds to wider criteria. We are working on the interaction of climatic, cultural, economic, political, urban, and social factors on the built fabric. So working on these different scales also implies for pushing for a multidisciplinary practice. We want to blur the traditional roles and encourage collaboration between architecture and other disciplines. With this approach, climatic phenomena emerge as a fundamental aspect on which architectural efforts are based. We see climatic phenomena not only as a challenge to be met, but also as a guideline in the design process. And we want to integrate our project as optimally as possible with the surrounding, seeking for beneficial relationship between architecture and everything that is coming with it. The few pictures that you have just seen, we have seen, it's a project called Parc de l'Amour Éternel, which could be translated as Park of Eternal Love. And this is one of our first projects. It's a project in which we were taking into account non-human environments, plants, animals, soil, water, and mostly birds. It's actually an installation in the city of Lausanne in Switzerland for birds. It's a 20-meter high steel construction where the birds can come eating the seeds and spreading them around the city to intensify its vegetation. Let's try the microphone again. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's good.
No?
Try again.
Right?
I get yours.
Ready? now. So, triggering what's available. In the global climate crisis, in which we are all trying to deal with, we need to develop processes to promote the efficient use of resources. To us, this starts by taking a serious look at what is already existing, what is available, and by developing a deep interest in what we see and discover. What qualities exist, what should we keep, and what needs to be improved. We need to rethink our strategies and methods, starting from the existing or the available. And somehow all projects are the transformation of an existing situation or of an existing context, and there is always something to take it out of it. So such an approach cannot follow any preconceived way to act, norms, or any standards. The process of designing becomes a series of reactions based on careful observations throughout the project. With this approach, the practice of the architect is more like the one of a researcher, by finding and discovering, and also a lot of observation and understanding the existing qualities of what is there, about investigating the potentials and interpreting what we observe to develop a precise and subjective reading of the situation we face. So each project has to respond to a specific situation with a proper and precise intention. And what we are deeply convinced in is that working with what's available is an opportunity to generate innovative architectural solutions that respond precisely to existing parameters. The few images we have just seen are from a series of pilot projects that we are now working on. Pilot project that we have initiated with the Heritage Office of Region Neuchâtel in Switzerland, so a region in the Swiss mountains, for the preservation and transformation of old traditional farmhouses. These projects are proposing not only to work with the existing structures or the built fabric, of course with a lot of care by transforming them, but also providing a structure to maintain their agricultural function and be suitable for contemporary ways of making agriculture today. Indeed, many of these farmhouses are today too small to fulfill any agricultural function anymore, and are all being turned into housing lofts for new generations, and therefore completely losing the purpose for which they were built. So what was originally a building which was used to store wheat and cereal is now going to adapt into an infrastructure to grow vegetables by some very specific intervention. First of all, changing the classical roof tiles with a greenhouse-type glazed roof, a new infrastructural device to collect rainwater and to redistribute it for irrigation, and most of all, the treatment of the soil of the interior of the structure, breaking down the existing slabs, allowing to create a perfect condition to grow vegetables within the structure, so inside of the building, but still in open ground. The shop, so shop basically means barn in Swiss German. And this is one of the it's this small wooden structure that is very close to the project House for Everything that we were showing before. It's right next to it, actually. And it's a project about valuing something which already exists, valuing an available structure and the history that it carries. And most of all, it's the project of convincing the owner and the client to maintain and transform it instead of demolishing it, which was unfortunately their original plan. In the end, we managed to build a project with half of the budget that was originally planned by the owner for its replacement. And the goal of the intervention was to stay very simple and pragmatic. It was about fixing or solving a few problems in the existing structure, fixing what didn't work instead of starting from scratch. One of the first change was to lower the first floor 1 meter down in order to make it unusable volume and therefore to gain a floor. Then we had to add a stair to make it accessible, and in order not to lose too much space, we made this stair escamotable. So you basically see the counterweight and when you don't need it, it lifts back up. And for security reason, we just added this mesh, this metal mesh that allows to completely store things safely, but without breaking any visual connection. On the other side, we cut a large piece of the facade and put it on hinges in order to open the space towards the fields. I think it's probably the cheapest and the biggest door we ever managed to build. Then we also used the opportunity of the proximity of this barn to our other project to install most of the technical installation required by both houses in the barn. And we provided the roof with a large number of translucent solar panels that we now produce more than 10 times the electricity which we need. Basically, by convincing the owner to transform this old wooden structure, by allowing him to understand its value, we did not only save him a lot of money, but the space also now allows for much more than what we have expected. It's now used together with the house for almost everything, to host events and activities for the inhabitants of the village. Here we can see the detail of how we lowered the floor, which basically also allowed us to reinforce the existing wooden structure of in the same move. And the space basically created between the semi-transparent solar panels and the graded floor. The Dépôt d'Oeilweg is a competition project we had done for the transformation of the site of a former bus depot into a large-scale social housing. Our proposal was to work with the entire existing structure by transforming and extending it, whereas the competition brief was asking to mainly use the central part and to demolish all the rest of what was on the site. So basically all the project came from this decision to keep what was existing, starting from there and developing the project from what was already there. And basically it has produced many moments which we again could not predict or could not expect, and things we could never have been able to draw from scratch. Somehow the need to deal with this existing structure allowed us to offer much more than a simple housing building. The main existing central hall then becomes the entrance for all the apartments, where communal activities can take place, meetings, parties, concerts, basically a large covered space for the inhabitants, but also for the city. The best is that everything was already there. We just needed to change the way we look at it through a meticulous transformation. So this decision to keep the existing also allowed us to provide much more diverse programs and typology, enhancing the variety of the housing typologies and spaces we could produce. For instance, all the building parts here are existing fabric. We just removed part of the roof in order to create this shared garden for the maisonette typologies on both sides. So by reacting to the structure of the bus garage, we were able to propose more qualitative, more generous typologies, and also much more fascinating moments. Existing spaces of the building were also transformed into very interesting typologies, or what at least for us were much more interesting than the new ones. Again, typologies that we never had been able or never have even dared to draw from scratch in the Swiss context. With garden views to the sky, with private gardens, views to the sky, personal staircase, and much more. Overlooking the outside space we have seen before in the image from the terrace and then to the room. Making the most out of everything which was already there. The notion of triggering what's available and basically making the most out of what's existing is, we can say, an obsession for us. And we have now the chance to share with our students in the architecture school in Versailles the same obsessions. We are starting by creating an analysis or an atlas of precise typologies of transformation, a type of repertory of logics of transformation. Starting from there, we are looking for strategies to value and transform existing structures. So this notion of sharing doubts, questions, and exploring with students while teaching has led us to experiment a lot in many series of workshops. In this case here, in Slavutich in Ukraine, right before the war, where we had been activating public spaces with minimal means, turning here, for instance, the immense and very hot concrete main square into a beach, but just for one day. Here, our work was mainly about gathering people around the project, convincing the local mayor, the firemen, involving the schools, and changing the way we can perceive a space through minimal means, but with maximum impact, creating a totally new situation of an existing context. That's a little break.
Let's try. Like this. Okay. So the last of our 4 chapters is called hands-on. So basically the act of doing. And it's about projects being a long series of steps, of iteration, of trials, of attempts, of failures, of course, and mostly hypotheses. So we see project as a succession of action and reactions, always having a precise aim in mind, but never anticipating the outcome. Nobody knows how it will end. So we are working a lot with our hands. This is something we really appreciate. And we do it for all projects at all scales. During workshops, we are also applying the same attitude on a construction site or on bigger scales. And this is to us a very direct way of understanding and clarifying what we are doing. To be confronted with real questions of dimension, of weight, of detail, of assemblage, of putting things together, and to be able to try out an experiment. The idea is to develop specific details for the construction we are trying to solve. And it's also about leaving room for appropriation for what could happen. For example, this installation on the right, done by a group of students in Geneva, which completely changes the appearance or the way we understand this element once it's lifted from the ground. So somehow losing its weight. Each time we try to act as precisely and efficiently as possible, but always looking for the most beneficial impact. So we are looking for simple decisions, but with the widest impact possible. We are developing specific detail, testing ways of building, of assembling. And this means that we consider all projects as prototypes. They are all tests, all experiments. And these are not always successful, but the thing is to be able to react and to adapt according to what we understand by doing with our hands. We are looking for a specific way of assembling, of putting things together. We are not applying standard construction logics, but we tend to find a specific answer to each situation, for each constructive problem, to each piece of material. So it's really an experimentation from the detail, from the construction, from the material. And this image are coming from a series of workshops that we were leading in the past years at the head in Geneva and also at the University of Antwerp. And we had the chance to work with a very large group of students, which was also an amazing energy, especially when you try to build a lot with your hands. We were starting with collecting materials. They are leftovers from construction sites, but also unused materials, or even things we could dismantle from buildings that were about to be demolished. Sorry. And then it's about changing the understanding of these materials by the precise assemblage, but also by putting them into action. And this is why we call these workshops performing devices. For example, on the right, working on the position of this large industrial pipe and completely changing the way to experiment or to understand it. Or finding the way to assemble a large amount of different profiles of grids, of other elements, into a coherent ensemble. And what was amazing to us about this workshop is that we managed to go out of the school. We were working directly in the city. So the different devices were provided for association for the city, for the activities of these associations. Here you see an outside support and meeting point for a local radio. And because this hands-on approach is also about learning to react to a context, to the street, so it was really a way to learn about this and to provide at the same time something for the city in a very direct way. Here's a simple activation of a crossroad with a movable kitchen and fireplace. From one side, it's an open fireplace. From the other, it's kind of a kitchen where the heat is transmitted through these concrete pieces. So it's really a device in this case that is coming from these L-shaped concrete elements, which were actually leftovers from the construction of a street, some bricks, and half of a shopping cart. And by combining them in a specific way, by finding out the details, the construction logic, it becomes much more. And especially it allows for an action to take place. So by doing with our hands, we try to reach simple and efficient constructions. And to us, this is something fantastic, which we really like to do. We applied this hands-on approach to many different projects, and we realized that this allows us to reach results in a short amount of time, which is something we are not used as architects, as our projects most of the time last for years. In this case, we were working with a group of students in the Alps, and we proposed them to occupy a parking lot by building a lightweight structure to host a big party. And the pace of it was really amazing because we prepared the entire construction in 3 days. And it's a construction that works completely with material intention, in expansion, to push these materials to their limit. We were working with aluminum profiles, with cables, with membrane, with a lot of air and some screws. Sorry. And we could achieve to cover a large area with this very reduced amount of material. And we were allowed to do this also because we could transport everything in shopping carts and mount the structure in a few hours only. Now allowing us in the end to host a party for 500 students, which was a very nice experience. Each project is also a pretext to develop thoughts further to us, mainly by doing books, which allows to open up the discussion and to share experiences. So, as you might have understood, the place where we work is a place to build prototypes, to experiment, to test. And on this image, you see our former atelier, which was a place that was going to be demolished. This is also why we were able to use it. And in collaboration with the artist Arno Eubelen from Belgium and the architect David Moser, we have spent a lot of time collecting pieces from this building, collecting pieces and materials without really knowing where it would end, but just because it was there and available. And this allowed us to develop a very physical relationship to the building itself, cutting concrete slabs, dismantling elements, and building up our own catalog of components. So basically taking pieces of the building and collecting them in the building, working in the mine. And then we could develop new ways of assembling all of these materials together. In this assemblage, suddenly they're allowed to give a completely new meaning to these pieces. We're really pushing ourselves to understand the materials for their best qualities, for their best performance. It's always a lot of testing, of experimenting. And in this case, we put them all together for the Swiss Bienal of Territory. And all of these elements were reassembled into a steam bath, hammam. And it's something that it's an installation or construction that was accessible to the public in one of the main parks of the city. Every piece is coming exclusively from our old former atelier building. And the only thing we needed to develop were very specific ways of assembling the elements together. And then we left a pile of wood for the people to be able to activate it also on their own, which really worked out. So very pragmatic solutions. And again, as is each project is a pretext to question what and why we are doing things, we could not really see this one way of assembling the pieces together as an end result. And we started a collaboration with the chair of Karin Sander from ETH. And we could scan all of these elements, which allowed us to test new assemblage in a new way. And we are now developing new configuration to use these elements in collaboration with the Accademia di Arquitectura di Meuwly. With the same hands-on attitude, we have developed a solar oven for the Design Biennale in Zurich. Again, building everything ourselves in our atelier. And this allows us to develop every detail in a way it's really thinking by doing. And it's a process of collecting many leftovers and standard pieces. The question is again how to put them together. And how to put them together into a performing device. And then it was needed to be transported from our atelier to the botanical garden of Zurich, through the whole city, creating quite amazing encounters. And to activate the device, we collaborated with a fantastic team of chefs, which had to deal, of course, with the uncertainty of the sun, and also with the available servers from the botanical garden. And they were steaming, infusing, and much more, developing very specific cooking techniques that fits the device. But also, and maybe mainly, it goes in the other way around, that we mainly had to adapt our device or the way it was assembled to the knowledge of the chef. So technically it's a pretty direct assemblage. It's tension cables, and this tension creates the perfect parabolic shape to redirect the sun rays into one focal point, where the heat is stored into glass tubes, and it's reaching incredible temperatures we couldn't ever expect. And it has this very pragmatic system of following the sun with one turning point, two wheels, and then the axis of the parables can rotate. So always keeping the focal point adjusted. And to us, talking about this hands-on approach, it is very important not to make a clear boundary between the prototypes we build in the atelier, in the workshops, and the construction site. We always try to follow the construction site as closely as possible in order to be able to apply the same attitude. Like here, in this project called Club of Sound, when we got the commission to refurbish an old village house, and we started the construction without really knowing where it would lead, but we were convinced that the project would come from the discoveries we made on site. It's almost like an archaeological attitude. Always revealing what is already there and transforming in an acupunctural way, changing the way we perceive things with a series of precise intervention, changing the garage door, adding a new hut for the entrance. So it's a project made of many more projects, really step by step, reacting to the discoveries during the construction site, starting from the interior of the house, and then turning into a place of gathering for the people of the village. And it's a series of interventions that also spread to the garden in a further step. And in the end, everything is actually just a pretext. For example, the pretext of building a garden storage that turned out to become a wonderful space in the middle of the garden, and which is now used completely differently as what we had imagined or planned. And as we tried to somehow hitchhike or modify the building process, we were not drawing everything in advance. We also had to develop new tools, which are maybe less perfect, but certainly, and we believe, much more precise. And again, drawing the project until each little screw. With the Sunset project, the clients basically asked us only for the renovation of this pretty old and also heritage protected building. So our concern was how to re-question this basic assignment and always trying to offer more. So how can we as architects redefine the assignment? Basically doing something that was not asked, but in the aim of providing something more. And it's not just a value, because we deeply believe that we could offer more than just refurbishing these flats, but they were honestly, as we found them, that didn't have great qualities. And what we proposed was to reduce the expenses of the refurbishment by finding potentials that were already there, or many times also by not doing things. And also, maybe mostly by doing a refurbishment project that our client could build, they could build them on themselves. So we were not drawing plans, we were actually preparing construction guides for the client, like how to cut a wall or how to build a kitchen, and then they were producing it. And this allowed to save enough of the budget to propose a construction of the new terraces and winter gardens, leaning on the existing facade. So then we had this clear challenge from the transformation phase, which once again became kind of an archaeological site, discovering the old flooring under the many layers of the previous renovation. So it was a lot of surprises, some good and some bad, as always. And the form of these terraces comes from the very few construction rules of this region, saying that you have this angle that you're allowed to build, and that's what we followed to build the outside space. It's also the maximum space we could provide following the regulation. So in the end, each floor has a very generous terrace overlooking this fantastic landscape. And also it has the smallest impact on the garden, with just a few screws. And to finish the lecture, we have this short video of our former atelier space that we really like to show, because it shows something we are convinced about, which is the relation between the space where we work and what we produce. And we have been working in this place for 5 years until it got demolished. It's a former mechanic workshop in the outskirts of Zurich. It was a very large space, so we were not only us, but also many other architects and artists and landscape architects. So it was also a place that allowed us to collaborate a lot between us. And as you see, it's a space for experimentation. It's a purely a space where we can test, where we can build stuff. And this allowed us to, actually the building itself allowed us a lot, because this is a building from which we were taking a lot of parts and reassembling them afterwards. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Adrien, for the wonderful presentation and coming to both of you. It was super refreshing and very beautiful lecture. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Now we have some time for questions or comments from the audience. I had a little one. I wanted to ask you how you were dealing with these competitions that you are now doing, with this approach that you have of drawing every screw and of knowing every component and doing everything hands-on. How do you relate this to the scale of doing housing and larger competitions where you don't have all that knowledge and all that time at hand for working?
No, maybe in a way we are trying to stay, when we do this, let's say super large scale or big scale competitions or projects, what we try to do is also not to define everything in every single screw, but to draw projects which are as flexible as possible and that could in a way adapt to the material that we would then choose. And then we have another kind of approach we're also trying to develop on these larger scale projects, which we are not able to do on the smaller scale, is that there is this question of the reuse of material in Switzerland, that we can more and more easily access a beam from a former building and use it in a new building. And this also allows this kind of freedom of interpretation. When you hand in a competition, you can say, we will do reuse, and then they let you do something a bit more flexible because they don't expect that you know exactly 5 years before which beam you will be able to find on the market. And then this also allows to open up this discussion and to also change and adapt a bit the construction phases, even contractually, because you are able to keep a certain openness or flexibility within the construction drawings. So this is one trick, but we don't know yet the others.
Thank you. Is the other one not working? So the other
the small one. Yes.
this, yeah, we can keep it.
Entonces hay una pregunta.
Yeah, you can use it like
Well, thanks for the presentation. It's really inspiring. And maybe I would like to have a general thought about your viewpoint about the architecture discipline. That it's not like what I see is not a straight line practice, and I think it's very inspiring to think that architecture could be something else. And since we are in the university, probably there are a lot of students here, maybe it's a good thing to talk about this, like from your viewpoint and also from your daily life, working life, maybe how to define a general thought about what is your vision about the architecture on the whole, like in your practice.
Yeah, 2 hours.
Short.
No, maybe one. I mean, you have another idea. As we are teaching also a lot, so it's of course the question that we ask ourselves a lot. And we always tell the students, which might seem a bit disturbing, that we will teach them what we don't know and not what we know. And I think this is also the approach we try to have in the studio, that never doing what we already know how to do or what we know how it will end, because basically we don't really believe that this is the solution to apply this kind of frequency, or if you already know how it will finish, it's not really worth trying it. And I think it's also a question that leads into this teaching of exploration and being able to like have this open-ended attitude. And most of the time, I mean, of course, it's we have to accept that lots of time it also fails, but at the end, it's probably more interesting to take the risk to fail also than to stay in our very comfort zone.
No, I think I can also just add with this idea that we try always not to give solutions, but to find the right question or to really find the problematics. So this is something to us that is extremely refreshing, because every time we are facing a problem or a new project, we are trying to also refresh the way we work and the methods. And maybe we have been showing this main approach, but actually it has still a very wide range of doing things. And so I think there is also a very positive or optimistic way of looking at architecture, but it's somehow that we still learn every day, and that this is something fascinating to us.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the lecture. I really enjoyed to see the whole work explained by you at once, so it was a pleasure for me. I was surprised of some words used. For example, the only time the word construction appears is when you talk about construction site, right? But then, when you start talking about your work, you use another kind of words. For example, assemblage, you mentioned a few times, and also the idea of putting together. You know, if I can risk very quickly a definition of construction or assemblage, when you talk about construction, maybe the parts of the construction disappears into the whole. But when you speak about assemblage or putting together, the parts or the element are still there. They express where they come from and how do they react one to the other. Of course, there is an ethic related to that, but I'm sure, as we all saw tonight, there is also an aesthetic approach to it. So maybe we can, if you have energy, you can say something about that.
No, I think that's a comment we appreciate, I think, because it's also the way we think our constructions, to use the term once, to put things together. And maybe we don't know exactly where it's coming from, but it's something we developed, or the way that we are working on our projects, that we are doing it bit by bit, step by step. And maybe we're showing, for example, this filter house where Conte was saying that when we had already built the structure, we didn't know how we would put the walls inside. And certainly, a lot of this idea of assemblage also comes from the possibility to react during the process, and the process of the project not being only the moment when you draw, but also the moment when you build, I think.
Well,
Also, thank you so much for my time. I'm going for another deep question, but since you responded so nicely, I will try, and maybe it goes hand in hand with the response that you're already passing the mic to the response that you gave to this question, which is, I think we all saw tonight that you created a very coherent attitude already in a very early age, or very early time in your career, which very beautiful, and congratulations to that. So I was wondering, since there's still so much ahead in a possible career, I was wondering if there may be certain topics or attitudes or relations or questions. I think it was really beautiful what you said about teaching what you don't know versus maybe what you know. Maybe that could be a possible answer, but that certain attitudes or topics that work as a certain engine that you feel like this is a desire to push in all that is still to come in your very young career. And I feel, maybe a projective question for what you see your practice in the future, or certain topics that you feel you'd still like to engage with.
No, I think, of course, it's a real question. I mean, from both questions, they go together because we try to say that we don't know where the project should go, and then I don't think we should know today where our practice should go in 10 years. But of course, I think today we also have we have this huge chance to win several competitions in the previous years, and now we also have to find a way to adapt this attitude to bigger scale projects and to not be trapped into the normal way of building up again. So this is probably the challenge. I mean, it's a very challenging moment, but after that, maybe it's good. I'm ready to come to build in Buenos Aires.
Are you okay with Morgan?
Yes.
One more?
Yes.
Thanks so much. It was so beautiful. I have maybe two questions. One is that most of your work has been in metal construction in general, and now you're showing these projects you did with students, but also I think the Bienal sauna, and that you're dealing with why it's there, And I'm just curious to know, because you said at the very beginning that you don't use a catalog of details, right? But at some point, after doing so many metal projects, I guess you have your own solutions. What happens when you translate all that you know from metal, that it looks like your material, into these things that you found? Do you kind of try to push the standardization logic of things into details that are kind of, I don't know, like a wild card that you have to solve? I'm sorry, I have a second one that you need to answer, but it's about the first title of your chapter, the first chapter that you said you called construction details as forms, or something like this. But you didn't really explain it, or maybe I missed it, but of course, a poem can be interpreted. So I interpret it as a lot of things, but maybe you also have your definition of what does it mean to call, why do you call it a poem? The construction details.
No, I think this question, so maybe it looks like we've been building a lot of steel, but actually most of the projects we've seen are mainly hybrid constructions. And what we really try to do is to use each material for its best performance, for its parameters, what it can really produce as a structural device, as a thermal device, depending on the performance they're trying to reach. So basically, I don't think any of the projects we built are one we cannot say that's a concrete project, that's a wood. Most of them are totally hybrid. when we see materials because we needed to stand or to be light or to use as little material as possible, to save as much space as possible. But most of the projects are all type of, I mean, we have wood, we have everything. And I think this is also related maybe to the second part, related to the question of the reuse or dealing with this existing material. And that is also exactly the challenge, I think, for this is to not look at these materials for what we have, or what we know they are used to do. If you look at many of these things we have removed from our format atelier, but to try to understand what are their logics, how do they behave, what are their somehow parameters. And then once you understand this, you understand how you can combine them, what are their strengths, how to put them together. And this is maybe the way to bridge between using new material and this.
Yes. Because construction details as poems, I think there are many ways of understanding this sentence, but a poem is something that is very precisely constructed and open for interpretations. And I think if one day we reach that our construction details are as poems, we would be very proud.
I think that's a beautiful way to end tonight. Thank you.